This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. Everything you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Excitement, bittersweet goodbyes, people running around scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school in Crescent Grove was huge, easily over 1,000 students. To keep the crowd under control, staff dismissed us in groups from different wings of the building. My friends and I waited by the art hallway, joking about summer plans. After the bell, we poured outside into the warm afternoon. Parents crowded the pickup lane, and buses lined up along the curb. I waved to a friend who was heading for a bus, then started walking toward the back of the school where my mom usually parked. The field behind the gym was mostly empty except for one man standing near the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought he was a teacher I didn't recognize, but something felt off. He was too still, and the way he faced me, head tilted slightly down, made my stomach knot. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat and an old-fashioned coat that didn't match the sunny weather. For a moment, I convinced myself it was part of some senior prank. But there weren't any seniors at our school. I slowed, unsure if I should cut across the grass like usual. The man didn't move. He just stood there, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. His hat threw his face in darkness, though I sensed his eyes were on me. The longer I stared, the heavier the air felt, like the world was holding its breath. A voice behind me, my friend Lila calling goodbye, broke the tension. I glanced back to wave, and when I looked again, the man was gone. I told myself I must have imagined him, maybe a parent walking their dog or someone cutting through the woods. I brushed it off and hurried to my mom's car. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me think of that still figure at the treeline. Sometime after midnight, I got up for water and looked out the kitchen window. The street was quiet except for a tall shape standing under the lamppost across the road. Same hat, same long coat. I froze, glass halfway to my mouth. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. I blinked, and he was closer, standing at the end of our driveway. I yanked the curtains shut and ran upstairs, heart hammering. I didn't sleep until dawn, and when I finally looked out, the street was empty. Over the next week, I saw him 3 more times. Once outside the library, once near the soccer field while I was biking, and once in the reflection of a store window, looming behind me, though when I turned he wasn't there. Each time, he never came closer than 30 feet, but his presence was heavy, like cold air pressing against my skin. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. I didn't tell anyone because how do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Then, during a storm one afternoon, I stayed late at school finishing an art project. The hallways were nearly empty as I headed toward the exit. Lightning flashed through the windows, and for a split second I saw him standing in the courtyard. The brim of his hat gleamed wet from the rain, and his face, if you could call it that, looked stretched, featureless except for 2 dark pits where eyes should have been. I bolted down the hall and ducked into the bathroom, locking the door. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone twice before finally texting my mom to pick me up at the front. When I worked up the courage to leave, the courtyard was empty again, puddles rippling in the wind. That weekend I stayed over at Lila's house. I didn't tell her everything, just said I felt uneasy at home. Her family lived near Crescent Grove Cemetery, and their guest room window faced a patch of old gravestones. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a tapping sound on the glass. At first I thought it was rain, but the sky was clear. I sat up and nearly screamed. He was there, standing outside the window on the lawn, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. Somehow, even through the dark, I could feel his gaze. He slowly raised one hand and pointed at me, a bony finger extending from his sleeve. I scrambled out of bed, shaking Lila awake. By the time she looked, the yard was empty. She thought I'd been dreaming, but I knew I hadn't. The imprint of a shoe was visible in the damp grass the next morning, large, old-fashioned, and pointing straight toward the house. After that, I begged my parents to let me stay inside after dark. They laughed, saying I'd been reading too many scary stories. But something about the man felt older than stories, older than anything I could name. On the last night of summer, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps on our porch. Moonlight spilled across my floor. I crept to the window and looked out. He was standing at the bottom of the steps, hat brim low, face hidden. I could feel a pull, like a rope tugging me forward. My fingers tightened on the window latch before I snapped out of it. I backed away, heart in my throat, and hid under the covers until morning. We moved to a different neighborhood a month later. I never saw the man in the hat again, but sometimes, when I pass an open field at dusk or see mist curling along the ground, I get the same crawling sensation up my spine. I know he's still out there, waiting for someone else to notice him. And if they do, I hope they're strong enough not to follow when he points. I was 16 the summer my parents sent me to stay with my aunt and uncle in a tiny rural place called Ash Hollow. They said I needed a break from the city, a chance to breathe fresh air. I wasn't thrilled. The nearest town was miles away, and the house stood on an old logging road surrounded by nothing but pine trees and fog. My aunt loved to tell me Ash Hollow had a history full of ghost stories, but I didn't think much of it at first. The first week was quiet. I read paperbacks on the porch, helped stack firewood, and wandered the trails behind the house. The woods felt heavy, like they were holding their breath. On cloudy evenings, mist crept through the trees until it curled around the porch rails. My uncle said it was just how the valley trapped cool air, but the fog always seemed to move with purpose, like it was looking for someone. One night, my aunt made cocoa and we sat by the wood stove. I asked about the stories she used to mention when I was little. She lowered her voice and said people called Ash Hollow haunted because of the White Lady. According to legend, she had been a young bride whose carriage overturned on the steep road back in the 1800s. They say she wanders the woods searching for her lost wedding ring, and if she finds you instead, she'll try to lead you off the path. Forever. My uncle rolled his eyes, but I noticed he kept glancing toward the window while she spoke. A few nights later, I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, crunching steps that paused between each one. I assumed it was my uncle getting firewood, but the steps didn't head toward the shed. They circled beneath my window. I pushed the curtain aside, but all I could see was fog pressing against the glass. My pulse hammered as the steps stopped right below me. After a long silence, I convinced myself it had been a deer and went back to bed. The next morning, I found faint marks in the gravel. Long, thin streaks like someone had dragged a stick. My aunt frowned when I mentioned it, then said, "Probably just a raccoon." Her voice was too quick, too light. That afternoon, while exploring a trail that led to an old stone bridge, I felt like someone was following me. The woods were silent except for the crunch of my boots. Every few minutes, I'd hear a soft rustle behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. The air smelled faintly of lilacs, even though there weren't any flowers around. By the third week, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. One cloudy evening, I decided to test myself. I walked down to the bridge just as the sun set. The mist rolled in thick and white, swallowing the trees until only their tops showed above it. Standing in the middle of the bridge, I heard faint weeping. At first I thought it was water under the stones, but the sound grew clearer. Definitely a woman crying. I turned, and that's when I saw her. A pale figure stood at the edge of the fog, wearing what looked like a tattered wedding dress. Her head was bowed, hair hanging in front of her face. She didn't move, but somehow I knew she was looking right at me. My instincts screamed to run, yet I couldn't. She lifted one arm and pointed into the forest. Her hand was so thin it almost looked like bone. I heard her whisper, but the words were lost in the wind. The fog thickened until I could barely see the bridge railing. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was stepping off the bridge, following her gesture. My boots sank into wet moss as I walked deeper between the trees. Everything was silent except for the rustle of her dress ahead of me. It shimmered faintly, a patch of white threading through the mist. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped, loud, sharp. The sound broke whatever hold she had on me. I spun around and bolted back toward the bridge. When I glanced over my shoulder, she was standing perfectly still among the pines. This time I could see her face, pale as moonlight with hollow, shadowed eyes. She smiled, slow and deliberate, before fading back into the fog. I didn't stop running until I reached the house. My aunt was on the porch, pale and worried. "Where were you?" she asked. I told her everything, shaking so hard I spilled half my story. My uncle came out, set his jaw and said, "That's why we tell folks not to wander at dusk." That night, they burned sage at the doorways and made me sleep on the couch near the stove. My aunt said the white lady sometimes tried to lure travelers, and that listening to her voice was dangerous. "She wants company," she whispered. "But once you go with her, you don't come back." The rest of the summer, I stayed close to the house after dark. Even in daylight, I caught flashes of white between the trees. Once I found a damp footprint on the porch, bare, small, and pointed like it belonged to someone in old-fashioned shoes. On my last morning, fog hugged the valley thicker than ever. As we packed the car, I looked toward the woods. For a heartbeat, I saw her there, the faint outline of a woman watching from the mist. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She just stood there as if she was waiting for me to take one wrong step. I turned away, climbed into the car, and didn't look back until Ash Hollow was far behind us. Even now, years later, whenever I smell lilacs on a cold breeze, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. I don't think she wanted to hurt me, but she wanted me to stay. And if I had followed her all the way into those trees, I don't think I'd be here to tell you about it. When I was about 9 years old, I lived with my mom and little sister in a small haunted house in Ravenswood, Maine. The street was mostly safe and kids would ride their bikes outside in the summer. But even back then, there were things that didn't feel right about the house. My mom used to say it was old, and old houses make noises. But some of the things I remember from that time didn't sound like house noises. They sounded like something else. Something I still don't really know how to explain. The first thing started one night when I couldn't sleep. I was lying in my bed with a blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the little glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. My room wasn't very big, just a bed, a dresser, and a toy chest near the window. I remember looking at the shadows on the wall from the trees outside. The branches swayed whenever the wind blew, and I told myself that's what I was seeing. But then I noticed one shadow wasn't moving like the others. It was in the corner, down low near my toy chest. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes or one of my big stuffed animals. I almost laughed at myself because I thought I was just being a scared kid. But then I blinked and the shadow was gone. I remember feeling cold, the kind of cold that comes from inside your body, not from the air. I pulled the blanket over my head and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I didn't even think about it until I saw my toy chest. It was standing open like someone had been looking inside. I never left it open because my mom would yell if toys spilled out. I closed it and didn't say anything. A few weeks later, my sister, who was only 5, told my mom she didn't like the man in the closet. I froze when she said it because she said it so casually, as if it were just a fact. My mom brushed it off and said, "Little kids imagine things," but I saw my sister's face and I could tell she wasn't making it up. She said he would stand in the closet at night and whisper, but she couldn't hear the words. My mom tucked her in that night and said a prayer with her, but she didn't check the closet. Later that night, I woke up because I heard something dragging across my floor, like someone pulling their nails across the wood. I was too scared to move, but the sound stopped right by my bed. I was sure if I looked over the side, I'd see something staring up at me. I just froze there, clutching the blanket until I fell asleep again. The next morning, there were long scratches on the floor right by the side of my bed. They were fresh, like someone had carved into the wood. I remember running to show my mom, but she got angry. She said I must have been playing with something sharp or dragging furniture. I swore I hadn't, but she didn't believe me. After that, the nights got worse. I would hear faint whispers, almost like a radio on low volume, coming from my closet. Sometimes my sister would cry in her room, and when I ran in, she would be pointing at the corner saying, "He's there, he's there." I never saw him, but I believed her. You know when someone's watching you and the hairs on your arms stand up? That's how it felt. The scariest night was in the middle of winter. I woke up and saw my bedroom door was open, even though I always shut it. I could see the hallway light because my mom left one on for us at night. But then, as I watched, the light in the hall went out. I thought maybe the bulb burned out. Then I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped outside my door. I wanted to scream for my mom, but nothing came out. The door creaked and I saw a tall, dark shape lean in, just its head poking into the room. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed and I was alone. In the morning, I asked my mom if she had come into my room. She said no. She had been asleep all night. My sister said she saw the man again standing by her bed. We told my mom together and she finally looked worried. She lit a candle and said a prayer in each room of the house. Things were quiet for a little while after that, but it didn't last. One afternoon, I came home from school before my mom. I was sitting on the couch doing homework when I heard the sound of the toy chest in my room slam shut. The thing is, nobody else was home. I hoped it was just the wind, but when I walked down the hall, I saw my bedroom door was wide open. My toy chest was closed, but all my toys were scattered on the floor like someone had dumped them out. I backed away and waited outside until my mom came home. When I told her, she still didn't believe me and said the cat knocked things over. Years later, after we moved out, I asked my mom if she ever experienced anything in that house. She hesitated, then said yes. She said sometimes she would wake up and see a shadow standing in her doorway. She said she never told us because she didn't want to scare us, but she admitted she believed there was something wrong with that house. She said she thought it was a man, someone who used to live there. She never said much more, but I know what I saw, and I know what my sister saw too. Even now as an adult, when I think about that time, I feel sick in my stomach. It wasn't imagination. It was something real, and it wanted us to know it was there. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear the sound of nails dragging across the floor.